Internet, it's Emily S.W.
Sam.
And we are here with an episode of the Podcastle. This time, Sam is the mastermind, so I'm gonna let her do all the introductions.
Yeah, I did all the research.
Mm-hmm.
Last time, we talked about J.R.R. Tolkien, specifically his poetry.
Yes, this is the second of our National Poetry Month specials.
So this time, we're going to be talking about Percy Bysshe Shelley, who I will hereout be referring to as Percy or Shelley, because Bysshe Shelley is horrible to say.
Yeah, officially. Yeah.
I had this idea when we were looking up poems because it is National Poetry Month, and Colleen loaned me Shelley's Poetical Works, which this is a reprint of a book that originally came out in the 1830s. So I was just looking for poems, and I was just doing a little bit of light research because...
She says while she's holding up a giant book.
Light research. It wasn't from this book. It was from Wikipedia, but I have more about that. Percy is... I think, in our minds today, most famous for...
being Mary Shelley's husband.
Correct.
And dying young.
Yes. But Percy also had, again, as I'm holding this whole tome, a lot of important poems. He was also a writer. There is some debate about whether or not he actually co-wrote Frankenstein, or whether he did so much editing to it that a lot of it is also his contribution.
Yeah.
Something that's debated, how involved he actually was. Because Percy and Mary edited each other's works.
I mean, I guess if you're both writers, that makes sense.
So as I was doing the light research, I thought, wow, this is a really interesting person. So I thought we would delve into it more with a dedicated episode. Because, again, I think his work itself is largely forgotten in pop culture, whereas Frankenstein is the thing that has endured.
Oh, absolutely.
But he's clearly very important to the development of that story as well.
Yeah.
And an integral part of Mary Shelley's life.
And her mythology.
Having been married to him. Right?
Yes.
But ultimately, my primary research came from two sources. This book, which is, again, Shelley's Poetical Works.
Yep.
Which is, I think this was the 1904 reprint.
Edited by T.
Hutchinson. But the really notable thing about this being the reprint of the 1839 edition, it has notes from Mary.
That's so cool. That is very cool.
And then my other source of information was my 1973 Encyclopedia Britannica.
Not Wikipedia.
Not Wikipedia. No, I think in today's world of AI, garbage, internet, the encyclopedia, it doesn't want to know my location. It's already at my location, so I guess it doesn't need to. It's not trying to advertise to me. There's no pop-ups. It's not stealing my data. Is it outdated because it's 50 years old?
Yeah.
Yes.
But
do I think that our knowledge about Percy Shelley's life has really been updated?
Probably not.
Not really. Do I think anything will be more accurate than Mary Shelley's account, considering the fact that she was there?
Yeah, definitely not.
No.
Yeah.
So for this research, I think it was perfectly fine. And I did also notice maybe bias difference in how Wikipedia talked about Shelley.
Oh.
Versus how Britannica did.
Okay, interesting.
Britannica had a much kinder view.
Okay, so whoever is in there editing the Percy Shelley Wikipedia page, not kind.
Not particularly.
Okay.
No. In the Wikipedia page, he's a radical, a revolutionary, which he was. There was a lot of controversy and problem in his life. But the encyclopedia referred to him as a reformer, an intellectual.
So whoever wrote the Wikipedia had a bit of a family values spin.
Yeah, it was a lot more dramatic.
Yeah.
The format I want to do for this is a little different, because what I'm going to do is, instead of just giving an overview of the person's life beforehand, we're going to incorporate the life story throughout and then interject the poems at the important parts of his life.
Okay, sounds good.
This is also another idea. I kind of had it formulating, but because the encyclopedia was also kind of structured this way, where it said what he wrote at certain points in his life, I thought this is the way to do it.
Yeah, smart.
So I have also put notes in the poem book, and they're all numbered in the order. They're not necessarily all published in order that he wrote them, so that's why it's not chronological in here, but I numbered them so we would read them chronologically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So should we just start at the very beginning?
That seems logical.
Yes.
Yes, please.
So yes, Percy Bysshe Shelley was born in 1792 in Sussex to a Conservative Parliament member.
Okay.
Which I think is very fascinating considering how revolutionary and radical he became.
Rebel. Daddy issues.
He had a comfortable childhood, studied at a private school in Eton where he studied science, Latin, and he also read popular Gothic novels of the day.
Okay.
And in fact, his first published novel was called Zatrozi, a romance, and this was written in 1810. And he published it as a student in an attempt to imitate Anne Radcliffe.
Oh, I wonder if we could track a copy of that.
I looked it up, and I don't think it's something we want to read.
Oh, okay.
Because, first of all, it's like something he wrote a lot of things he wrote as a teenager because he didn't live very long. Unlike, The Monk, which was written by a 19-year-old, apparently Percy thought it'd be really funny to just not really write the whole thing, and they think there's chapters missing, but he might have done that on purpose.
What an excuse. What a freaking excuse.
So I
think part of this book's missing. No, it's not. I did it on purpose.
So I don't necessarily know if that will be...
Yeah, okay.
Doable.
Maybe not then.
The whole point was he was trying to write Gothic a la Anne Radcliffe. So we're already off to a great start with our influences here.
Oh yeah, he's right up our alley.
Some of his early poetry he actually wrote with his sister, Elizabeth.
Okay.
In 1810, he started attending Oxford.
Ooh, very prestigious.
Yes, his primary interest was in 18th century French philosophy.
Boy, that's really applicable to everyday life.
Right. And this, again, where the encyclopedia emphasized reformer, pacifist, idealist. He wrote a pamphlet entitled The Necessity of Atheism.
Hippie.
So, Oxford being a more religious school,
yes,
this did not go over well.
Oh, I can't imagine it did. Especially, even just back in the day generally.
He was expelled.
Man, flew too close to the sun.
Now, again, this is where the internet differs. So the internet described the necessity of atheism as like his treatise on why God doesn't exist.
Alright.
Whereas in the encyclopedia, it gives you the impression it was more of a think piece on the role of religion in politics. Or why religion shouldn't be in politics.
I have not read this, but just going off the title, it seems like the encyclopedia seems more logical. The title seems to fit more with that.
I had to stop and research, like, Plato and some of these other philosophical concepts.
Yeah.
And I don't believe he had a belief in religion, I'll get to it later.
Okay.
But his concept of God was not, like, in line with the traditional Christian concept of what God is.
That's dangerous in
Yes.
the 1800s.
He was expelled from Oxford, he was disowned by his father, and he moved to London and had a rather lonely set of teen years, during which he wrote a poem called Alastor, or The Spirit of Solitude, which was published later in his life, but this is about when he wrote it, during his lonely teen emo years.
Ah, classic and emo poem.
Yeah, so
I know them well.
This will be the first one that we'll read from the book.
Oh, I like this format. I'm so intrigued.
I had to go through, so some of these songs, these poems are long. Like pages and pages and pages and pages. So I had to kind of like skim through and try to find a stanza that looked interesting, so we weren't here all day. There's also a note specifically on this poem from Mary Shelley.
Oh, okay.
And in this, she was talking about how shortly before he wrote it, he was actually diagnosed with tuberculosis.
Oh, yikes.
And he wasn't expected to live very long.
Yeah, tuberculosis was almost a death sentence.
Yes, but he recovered. But she said he was so kind of shaken up by this near-death experience that is also something that influenced this poem.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
So I think I had picked out... This is starting at line 50. You'll see how this is a little autobiographical.
Oh boy, okay.
There was a poet whose untimely tomb no human hands with pious reverence reared, but the charmed eddies of autumnal winds built o'er his mouldering bones a pyramid of mouldering leaves in the waste wilderness, a lovely youth, no mourning maiden decked, with weeping flowers or votive cypress wreath, the lone couch of his everlasting sleep. Gentle and brave and generous, no lorn bard, breathed o'er his dark fate one melodious sigh. He lived, he died, he sung in solitude. Strangers have wept to hear his passionate notes, and virgins as unknown he passed have pined, and wasted for fond love of his wild eyes. The fire of the soft orbs has ceased to burn, and silence too, enamored of that voice, locks its mute music in her rugged cell.
That really does sound like an emo teenage poem.
We just talk about his use of orbs.
I was just about to say that. I was just about to say, this is some My Name is Raven Dementia Darkness, or
Ebony Darkness Dementia Raven Way.
Yeah. Like the way, oh my god, the line about the virgins. Can you read that again?
Virgins as unknown he passed have pined.
He's like, man, bitch want me. Too bad I'm dying. That's great. I wasn't expecting to get a chuckle out of that. Emo King.
Yes. I think that sums up that whole poem.
It really, yeah. I might read that for my own self. I've had the idea forever of doing, like, fanfic as Gothic. I'm citing that poem. The orbs.
1811, he eloped with Harriet Westbrook, who was a friend of his sister's. He was 19 and she was 16.
Okay, not great.
No.
Could be worse. We've read about worse.
Yeah, it's also 1811.
Yeah.
So...
I mean, at least they're not related.
No, Harriet was a friend of his sister's, I believe, is said from their school. And Harriet's father was a retired hotel keeper. That's why they eloped, because, Percy had been disowned.
Yeah.
And I don't think that Mr. Westbrook saw him as good prospects.
I mean, I try not to be judgmental, and I am also a creative soul, but I don't see Percy having good prospects either.
No, they also weren't really compatible.
Well, considering I know that they don't stay together...
Percy basically thought that Harriet would just have to read up to get knowledge so they could have intellectual conversations, but of course now Harriet being a wife and then she started having children didn't really have time for that.
Yeah.
And they also had no money.
Well, that's an issue.
So, yeah, not a great position for your intellectual pursuits, but Shelley just believed that their intellect would overcome all of their everyday marital problems.
People don't change, do they?
And the thing about Percy that I think is so frustrating is he's such an idealist to the point of being irrational.
Stupid. He's an idiot.
But he's so book smart, but he's got no common sense.
Yeah, which I feel like he goes through, like he seems to be going through these hardships. Like I feel like that should teach him.
Well, here's the thing. Maybe not distributing to the clergy people at Oxford a pamphlet entitled "The Necessity of Atheism" and expecting that to work out okay.
Yeah, I really.
But he was not alone in that endeavor. He had a friend, and this friend was a lifelong friend that he met from university who was also expelled with him, and his name was Thomas Hogg.
H-O-G?
G. H-O-G-G. Hogg.
Great name.
2 G's, yes. And he's notable because he apparently had some kind of relationship with Harriet.
Okay.
There were kind of rumors about something going on between him and Mary. What my impression is, though, that Mary was so devoted that nothing really happened. But because both the Shelleys came from a different sort of philosophical background when it came to marriage. Percy knew who William Godwin was already, and already knew about his philosophical ideas. William Godwin is Mary Shelley's father.
Yeah,
so
okay.
They were known to him, and this is where I had to look up some of these philosophical concepts.
Gotcha, okay.
Percy's first major poem is called Queen Mab.
I know that Mab is,
the Queen of the Fairies.
Yes.
And this is written during his time with Harriet.
Okay, first elopement, first wife.
So this poem in particular kind of illustrates his shifting ideas away from Platoism to Godwinism. And for Plato, and this is important in his views of religion. So in Plato, God is a supreme, benevolent soul.
Okay.
That all souls, even though we all have free will, kind of are led by this ultimate spirit.
Makes sense. It's kind of like when people today say they're spiritual. Mm-hmm. They believe in a higher power, but not.
Yes. Yeah. But instead of God, and Percy's kind of understanding of the world is that God is not a creative spirit.
Okay.
So instead of it's not a deity, it's just they called it the world spirit.
The force.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. I can dig it.
Godwin, also Mary's father, was an anarchist. He believed in the redistribution of wealth, but not communal ownership. He thought that wealth should be distributed according to need.
How do you determine the greatest need if not communally?
Right, like who decides that?
Yeah.
So that wasn't going to work. He rejected a lot of social norms, including marriage, and this is where I think Percy started to get his free love ideas. Instead of trying to repress your natural instincts, you just act upon whatever you want.
Yeah, that kind of guy. That's very,
It's hedonistic.
It's
He also
possible.
encouraged it for his wives, which is why they had maybe relationships with his friends.
so that's not red pill coded.
No.
Oh, they're just polyamorous.
Yeah, well, Shelley was.
Yeah.
I don't think the women in his life were necessarily okay with that.
The key to polyamory is that all parties need to be consenting.
Yes.
And consent must be enthusiastic. Otherwise, it is not consent.
Yeah, William Godwin married Mary Wollstonecraft for the sake of their children, so for legal reasons.
Yeah.
So we'll now read a portion of Queen Mab.
Okay.
Okay, Queen Mab. Another notable thing I wanted to mention is a lot of his poems start off with a dedication to who his wife was at the time, or whoever his primary love interest was at the time.
Whoever he wanted most into the pants of.
They weren't necessarily his wives.
Skirts of, yeah.
That was the thing. So this one starts off with a dedication to Harriet.
When was this written?
Probably in 1812. This is probably, so I guess it was probably in his notes and they don't really know. It's under the section Juvenilia, so it's one of his early poems.
Gotcha.
It's a philosophical poem with notes. This is pages and pages and pages long.
Holy moly.
And it's double columned.
That's a lot of poem.
So yeah, I'm not reading all of that. But I wanted to note upon the dedication to Harriet and then Queen Mab, and I'll just read the beginning.
Okay.
How wonderful is death, death and his brother sleep, one pale as yonder waning moon, with lips of lurid blue, the other rosy as the morn, when throned on ocean's wave, it blushes o'er the world, yet both so passing wonderful. Hath then the gloomy power, whose reign is in the tainted sepulchres, seized on her sinless soul, less than that peerless form, which love and admiration cannot view, without a beating heart, those azure veins, which steal like streams along a field of snow, that lovely outline which is fair, as breathing marble perish. Must putrefacition's breath leave nothing at this heavenly sight, but loathsomeness and ruin, spare nothing but a gloomy theme, on which the lightest heart might moralize? Or is it only a sweet slumber, stealing o'er sensation, which the breath of the roseate morning chaseth into darkness? Will Aeonth wake again, and give that faithful bosom joy, whose sleepless spirit waits to catch light, life, and rapture from her smile? Yes, she will wake again, although her glowing limbs are motionless, and silent those sweet lips, once a breathing eloquence, that might have soothed a tiger's rage, or thawed the cold heart of a conqueror. Her dewy eyes are closed, and on their lids, whose texture fine scarce hides the dark blue orbs beneath, the baby sleep is pillowed, her golden tresses shade the bosom stainless pride, curling like tendrils of that parasite around a marble column. I'm going to skip the next stanza and go on to the fourth one.
Okay.
Behold the chariot of the fairy queen, celestial coursers paw the unyielding air, their filmy pennons at her word they furl, and stop obedient to the reins of light. These the queen of spells drew in, she spread a charm around the spot, and leaning graceful from the ethereal car, long should she gaze, and silently, upon the slumbering maid. Oh, not the visioned poet in his dreams, when silver clouds float through the wildered brain, and every sight of lovely, wild, and grand astonishes, enraptures, and elevates, when fancy at a glance combines the wondrous and the beautiful, so bright, so fair, so wild a shape, hath ever yet beheld, and that which ranged the coursers of the air, and poured the magic of her gaze upon the maiden's sleep.
Orbs, huh?
Yeah, we're really,
I was just thinking, I was like, man, this is so, like, what was it, the breath of putrefaction or whatever? That was metal as
Yeah, must putrefacition's breath leave nothing of this heavenly sight but loathsomeness and ruin. I don't think we can laugh at people using orbs to say eyes and fic anymore. Or can we just laugh at Shelley harder for doing it?
We're laughing at Shelley, but we're laughing at Shelley because it's a bad fanfic trope. So, like, is it fair to him? I don't know. He's so dramatic.
Yes.
Like, even, I mean, poetry, is often, has, like, the imagery and the flowery language and stuff, but something about, like, the details he chooses to dwell on.
That's why his poems are so long.
Yeah. This is fascinating.
It's like a whole new world over here.
Yeah, it really is.
I did want to at least get to a little bit of this description of the actual character of Queen Mab. I know it took us a while to get there.
Nah, that's fine.
Alright, so Percy met Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin in 1814. And at this time, he was kind of coming to the conclusion that Harriet was not an intellectual equal for him, but Mary was.
Oh, shocking. The unmarried woman with no children to look after had more time to read? Crazy.
Yeah, everyone was in financial trouble at this time, and for some reason, Percy was paying for his own family as well as the Godwins.
Boy, he really wanted to get in his good graces.
Yeah, even though William Godwin opposed Mary and Percy's relationship, marriage not being a factor because they didn't believe in marriage, but he didn't want them to get married. At this point, Harriet starts to become like the other woman in her own marriage.
That really sucks.
She refused to accompany them on a trip and be presented as Mary's sister.
I am kind of surprised, actually, that Percy lived as long as he did. Like, that sounds like a motive to me.
Yeah, well, nothing happened to him on that front. And then in 1816, the Alistar, the poem that we read first, was actually published. Yes, and in 1816, the big event, Geneva with Mary.
Mm-hmm.
We're at Mont Blanc, and this is where they had their get-together with Lord Byron and Dr. Polidori. This is where it birthed that famous of tales, Frankenstein. Mary was probably really the most compatible person for him to be with.
Yeah.
Being a fellow writer and an intellectual and coming from a family of philosophers and political thinkers who kind of aligned with things Percy was interested in.
And also Mary Shelley being the gothic icon that she is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But his pursuit of this kind of perfect woman, I think, also informed his relationships and why he never really was faithful.
Yeah. Yeah,
because he was always looking for something that didn't exactly exist.
Yeah.
1816 is also the year that Harriet dies. She was found drowned in a lake.
Uh-oh. Was perhaps Percy nearby this lake?
No.
Okay.
I think that was while they were still in Switzerland.
Okay.
So the question is, was that something Harriet did to herself? Because now they're not really doing financially great. She's the second woman
in her own marriage.
Yeah. He's kind of straddled her with the kids and run off with his mistress.
He's kind of a jerk.
But the thing is, though, when Mary talks about him, it's all just adoration.
Well, I bet even just having done this light delving, like, we haven't fully delved into the poetry yet, but I bet he was a very charming person. I bet he could really lay it on, and when he wanted to, he could really make a woman feel, like, special.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find exactly the words that Mary used, because I think it was very telling. And I think that kind of the theory that she never really had any extramarital relationships holds true when you read about how dedicated to him she seemed to have been.
Yeah.
Alright, this is how she describes him. And this is from the preface to the 1839 edition of his poetry. The qualities that struck anyone newly introduced to Shelley were, first, a gentle and cordial goodness that animated his intercourse with warm affection and helpful sympathy. The other, the eagerness and ardor with which he was attached to the cause of human happiness and improvement, and the fervent eloquence with which he discussed such subjects. His conversation was marked by its happy abundance and the beautiful language in which he clothed his poetic ideas and philosophical notions. To defecate life of its misery and its evil was the ruling passion of his soul. He dedicated to it every power of his mind, every pulsation of his heart. He looked on political freedom as the direct agent to effect happiness of mankind, and thus any new-sprung hope of liberty inspired a joy and an exultation more intense and wild than he could have any felt for any personal advantage.
That is glowing.
She was in love with him, like
Yeah.
capital Love.
Yeah.
And again, this paints him as an idealist more than a radical revolutionary. Because those have kind of negative connotations.
Oh, absolutely. Not to get too far into it, but radical and revolutionary have negative connotations specifically because they go against the power structure that is already in place.
Yes.
So, like, they're negative because they're anti-authority. Yeah, to me, he just sounds like kind of the stereotype that you still see this in, like, books and movies and stuff today, where there's this really artistic person who is just so kind and loving and has all these grand philosophical ideas and writes beautiful poetry or creates music or paints or whatever it is. And they're just kind of flighty. And, like, they don't commit. They're always kind of jumping around from person to person, love to love.
I said before that Switzerland kind of inspired Frankenstein. It's set in Switzerland. And Shelley was inspired also to write some poetry. This is called Hymn to Intellectual Beauty.
Okay, alright. Hit me.
The awful shadow of some unseen power floats, though unseen, among us, visiting this various world with us as an inconstant wing, as summer winds that creep from flower to flower, like moonbeams that behind some piney mountain shower. Its visits with inconstant glance, each human heart in continence, like hues and harmonies of evening, like clouds and starlight widely spread, like memory of music fled, like aught that for its grace may be, dear and yet dearer for its mystery. Spirit of beauty that dost consecrate, with thine own hues all thou dost shine upon, of human thought or form, where art thou gone? Why dost thou pass away and leave our state, this dim vast vale of tears, vacant and desolate? Ask why the sunlight not forever weaves rainbows o'er yon mountain river, why aught shall fail and fade that once is shown, why fear and dream and death and birth cast on the daylight of this earth such gloom, why man has such a scope for love and hate, despondency and hope. I'm going to stop there because it goes on for like a page and a half.
Well, we didn't get the orbs again.
No, but I also didn't read the whole thing, so they may be in here. You never know.
I'll be honest. It's working on me, though. Like, he's a jerk. He's an absolute jerk. But his poetry, I kind of dig it.
This is, first of all, it's fun to read.
Yeah.
And if I didn't know what I knew about him personally, I'd be low-key falling in love with him.
Yeah. I don't even like men. And I'm kind of into this, yeah. It's effective.
So that was the Hymn to Intellectual Beauty.
Well, an excerpt.
Yes, because Percy Shelley's in pursuit of something that does not really exist.
See, that's such like a... Because to me, I don't know, it just kind of seems like he's talking about the life or the earth in general, not like a person.
No, but I think he applied this pursuit to his relationships as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Very idealized, which in a poem is very beautiful. It evokes emotion. In a person, not the healthiest.
Well, after Harriet was found drowned in a lake, Percy's got a problem. And that problem is the custody of his children.
Yeah, kids that he never sees.
He wants custody of children, but the court doesn't want to give it to him because they don't really see him as a morally fit individual.
Yeah, I'll be honest. He doesn't even have a job, does he?
Publishing poetry. He has been publishing.
Oh, okay, so that's how he's making money. Okay, so he does have a stream of income at this point.
Yes.
Okay. Because that's a big concern also with children, is that you need money to feed and clothe and house them.
Okay, so Percy and Mary get married so that he can try to get legal custody of his children. He still loses.
Yikes. Honestly, though, might have been better for the kids. He doesn't sound overly dedicated to the idea of fatherhood.
Otherwise, I should have written more details in my notes.
Mm.
But anyway, he and Mary were happy together. Because she's, I think, again, more compatible with him. She's able to keep up with his intellectual, philosophical, political ideas.
And clearly she's very in love with him, so that
yes.
probably helps. Yeah.
He also was receiving some very harsh critique of his poems at this point, especially with the publication of a poem, which, when it was published, was called Leon and Cynthia, or The Revolution of a Golden City, a Vision of the 19th Century. It was later published as The Revolt of Islam.
Those are two very different titles.
Yes, it's about a cultural revolution in a city that leads to a utopia.
Maybe he changed it to Islam so people would be like, he'd throw them off his tracks of being a radical, revolutionary, free thinker.
I feel like the Revolution of a Golden City suits it better. Unless it's supposed to be set somewhere in the Middle East or something.
Yeah, but like if it's not obvious in the poem itself.
I haven't read it yet, so maybe we'll find out when I read the excerpt. This poem was harshly critiqued.
Oh, okay.
And this is, again, another massive epic. But yes, it's about a bloodless revolution that leads to peace on Earth.
So what were the critiques?
The critiques,
Well, okay, read the poem and then we can discuss, maybe I can figure it out.
He also has some poems that are directly addressing the critics.
That always goes well.
Now see, this one starts off with a dedication to Mary, which is, by itself, over 3 pages long.
Okay. Was he getting paid by the word like the people who wrote Penny Dreadfuls?
You know what? It might have been. And you see, this is massive.
Oh my god.
120 pages.
That's a novella.
Yeah.
That is too much poem. I don't even need to hear any of it to know that is just too much poem. Very few people, I think, can pull off a poem of that length. And clearly a lot of people didn't think he pulled it off.
So I'll just read a couple stanzas again from the beginning.
Okay.
So this is Canto 1. When the last hope of trampled France had failed, like a brief dream of unremaining glory, from visions of despair I rose and scaled the peak of an aerial promontory, whose caverned base with the vexed surge was hoary, and saw the golden dawn break forth and waken each cloud and every wave, but transitory, the calm, for sudden the firm earth was shaken, as if by the last wreck its frame were o'ertaken. So as I stood, one blast of muttering thunder burst in far peals along the waveless deep, when gathering fast around, above, and under, long trains of tremulous mist began to creep, until their complicating lines did steep the orient sun in shadow. Not a sound was heard, when horrible repose did keep the forests and the floods, and all around darkness more dread than night was poured upon the ground. Hark! 'Tis the rushing of a wind that sweeps earth and the ocean. See, the lightnings yawn, deluging heaven with fire, and the lashed deeps glitter and boil beneath. It rages on, when mighty stream, whirlwind and waves upthrown, lightning and hail and darkness eddying by. There is a pause. The sea-birds that were gone into their caves to shriek come forth to spy what calm has fallen on earth, what light is in the sky. For where the irresistible storm had cloven, that fearful darkness the blue sky was seen, fretted with many a fair cloud interwoven, most delicately, and the ocean green, beneath that opening spot of blue serene, quivered like burning emerald, calm was spread on all below, but far on high, between earth and the upper air, the vast clouds fled, countless and swift as leaves on autumn's tempest shed. Forever, as the war became fierce between the whirlwinds and the wrack on high, that spot grew more serene, blue light did pierce the woof of those white clouds which seemed to lie far, deep, and motionless, while through the sky the pallid semicircle of the moon passed on in slow and moving majesty, its upper horn arrayed in mist, with soon but slowly fled like dew beneath the beams of noon. And so he goes on, describing the scene.
You want to skip ahead to the end, too?
Should I read some of the end?
Maybe the last, stanza or two. I'm just, it's pretty. Don't know what purpose it serves.
Here, I'll read the last 3 stanzas.
Okay.
From the very end. Steady and swift where the waves rolled like mountains, within the vast ravine where rifts did pour, tumultuous floods from their 10,000 fountains, the thunder of whose earth-uplifting roar made the air sweep in whirlwinds from the shore. Calm as a shade the boat of that fair child securely fled that rapid stress before. Amid the topmost spray the sunbows wild, wreathed in silver mist, in joy and pride we smiled. The torrent of that wide and raging river is past, and our aerial speed suspended. We look behind, a golden mist did quiver, where its wild surges with the lake were blended. Our bark hung there, as on a line suspended, between two heavens, that windless, waveless lake, which for great cataracts from 4 vales attend it. By mists I feed, from rocks and clouds they break, and of that azure sea a silent refuge make. Motionless, resting on the lake awhile, I saw its marge of snow-bright mountains rear. Their peaks aloft I saw each radiant isle, and in the mist afar, even like a sphere, hung in one hollow sky there did appear the temple of the spirit, on the sound, which issued thence drawn nearer and more near. Like the swift moon, this glorious earth around, the charmed boat approached, and there its haven found. Temple and spirit are capitalized, so this is an actual place. And in my notes, this poem marked his return to Platonism.
Yeah, I was just about to say. My guess on why it was heavily criticized: 1, it's not about Jesus. 2, it's too long. Like, I'm sure the rest of his words were very beautiful and the imagery and this, that, and the other thing, but I feel like I got the gist of it.
He spent a long time just setting the scene.
It made me think of, and maybe this is just because we talked about Tolkien last time, but it made me think of when the elves go to, when they leave Middle-earth and go back to the elf land that I've forgotten the name of. But that's always depicted as them, like, getting on a boat, and then, you know, they go off.
Over the Grey Havens?
Yes, and they go off into the sun and kind of ascend. It kind of reminded me of that.
Remember when I said that he was harshly critiqued?
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote poems to his critics.
No boy, clap back.
This is called Lines to a Critic.
Okay, very direct.
Honey from silkworms who can gather, or silk from the yellow bee. The grass may grow in winter weather, as soon as hate in me. Hate men who can't, and men who pray, and men who rail like thee, and equal passion to repay. They are not coy like me. Or seek some slave of power and gold, to be thy dear heart's mate. Thy love will move that bigot cold, sooner than me, thy hate. A passion like the one I prove, cannot divided be. I hate thy want of truth and love. How should I then hate thee?
He called himself coy. You wrote 120-something page poem. What do you mean, no, you're not coy?
And also, I want to also point out the poem above it is called A Hate Song.
Okay.
And the first line is a hater, he came and sat by a ditch.
Oh my god, can you read that, please? Is it long?
No, it's 4 lines. A hater, he came and sat by a ditch, and he took an old cracked lute, and he sang a song which was more of a screech against a woman that was a brute.
Oh my god.
Can we talk about how he's been using, like, these internet phrases?
Is the entire internet just Percy Shelley fanfiction? All internet
Haters.
Oh my god. I think internet fan culture is just based on Percy Shelley. Oh my gosh.
I also marked here, so we discussed about how he lost custody of his children.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a poem to the Lord Chancellor who made this decision.
Oh, I'm sure that helped. I'm sure that was gonna change his mind. How long is this one?
This one is pretty long.
Okay. I like to picture him, like, I don't know how custody hearings worked back then, but I like to picture him walking into the court, you know, dressed in his Sunday finest or whatever, and the judge has got his fancy wig on and his robes, and he walks in there and reads this verse.
Every single stanza of this is gold.
Okay.
So I have to try to pick and choose out of here.
Okay.
I think what I'll do is I'll read a couple from the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll read 5 through 9, and then the very last one.
Okay.
Alright, this is to the Lord Chancellor.
Okay.
This is about the custody of his children. I curse thee by a parent's outreached love, by hopes long cherished and too lately lost, by gentle feelings thou couldst never prove, by griefs which thy stern nature never crossed, by those infantine smiles of happy light, which were a fire within a stranger's hearth, quenched even when kindled in untimely night, hiding the promise of a lovely birth, by those unpractised accents of young speech, which he who is a father thought to frame, to gentlest lore such as the wisest teach, thou strike the lyre of mind, O grief and shame. By all the happy see in children's growth, that undeveloped flower of budding years, sweetness and sadness interwoven both, source of the sweetest hopes and saddest fears. By all the days under a hireling's care, of dull constraint and bitter heaviness, O wretched ye, if ever any were, sadder than orphans, yet not fatherless. And here's the last one.
Okay.
I curse thee, though I hate thee not, O slave, if thou couldst quench the earth-consuming hell, of which thou art a demon on thy grave, this curse should be a blessing. Fare thee well.
Oh, boy. That last line, that last stanza was...
Now, I should also mention, at this point, this was, 1817? He was born in 1792, so how old does that make him? 25?
Yeah. I think that makes him old enough for his prefrontal cortex to be fully developed, so... Wow.
Alright, so... After all this,
Mm-hmm.
Mary and Percy leave England out of fear that his children with Mary will also be taken from him.
Yikes.
I also want to point out that their eldest son, William, was born while he was still married to Harriet.
Double yikes.
And they go to Italy between 1818 and 1819. 1818, notably, is when Frankenstein was published.
Yeah.
Most of his children with Mary pass away.
That's sad. I mean, common back then.
And this is also when he wrote Prometheus Unbound, which I think is his most famous piece of work.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I don't remember if I've read it, but I definitely know of it.
I think it's also notable that the subtitle of Frankenstein is A Modern Prometheus.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I wonder if this is some sort of...
Oh, I know why I skipped this, because it is written as a drama. So there's like different characters and stuff in it. I'll just read like the very beginning. It's like, Act 1, Scene 1, a ravine of icy rocks in the Indian Caucasus. Prometheus is discovered bound to the precipice. Panthea and Ione are seated at his feet. Time, night. During the scene, morning slowly breaks. And it's Prometheus, monarch of gods and demons and all spirits, but one, who throng those bright and rolling worlds, which thou and I alone of living things behold with sleepless eyes, regard this earth, made multitudinous with thy slaves, whom thou requitest for knee worship, prayer and praise, and toil, and hecatombs of broken hearts, with fear and self-contempt and barren hope. So he's talking to Zeus.
Yeah. Alright.
That's that.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's probably one of his most famous pieces of work.
Definitely haven't read it, but I have heard of it.
Yes, and around this time he also wrote, and this was a piece of prose. It was called A Defense of Poetry, and it discussed the progression of science outpacing the progression of wisdom, which was very thematically similar to Frankenstein.
Yeah, interesting. So it goes with it.
Clearly they were working together, I think, on these ideas. I also think that's very relevant to today.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But because of this prose, it is not in the poem.
Yeah.
Alright, so Percy, he still hasn't given up his pursuit of ideal living government relationships. His idealism is projected onto these relationships, as I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, he starts his brief infatuation with a woman named Amelia Viviani. And he has a poem dedicated to her.
Shocking.
In this book.
Is there anybody he did not dedicate a poem to? Love, hate?
6.
Okay, yeah, I have no idea. I can't help you.
Okay, this one's short too. To Amelia Viviani. Madonna, wherefore hast thou sent to me sweet basil and mignonette, embalming love and health, which never yet in the same wreath might be? Alas, and they were wet. Is it thy kisses or thy tears? For never rain or dew such fragrance drew from plant or flower. The very doubt endears My sadness ever knew, the sighs I breathe, the tears I shed for thee. Send the stars light, but send not love to me, in whom love ever made health like a heap of embers, soon to fade.
The only thing I was thinking of near the beginning, when he's like, it's wet, and then he's like, is it your tears or your kisses? So I'm just like, why is she licking the plant? Like, that was an odd imagery.
Yeah, that one's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I didn't like that one as much. That one's kind of weird.
Well,
bad vibes.
You'll be happy to know this infatuation was short-lived.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't go anywhere, and he got really mad about it.
Shocking. Color me shocked. I'm surprised he didn't write another poem to her as a hater.
I mean, no. The next work I have noted is a tribute to his fellow poet named John Keats, and I believe it was because Keats had passed away. The poem is a lot about mortality, and this is kind of, again, drawing from the encyclopedia, where Shelley kind of comes up with this idea that he's looking for something that is not on this earth, and he's looking for something that only exists in, the eternal.
Gotcha, okay. Enlightenment.
Yes. So, Adonais. I weep for Adonais. He is dead. Oh, weep for Adonais, though our tears thaw not the frost which binds so dear a head. And thou, sad hour, selected from all years, to mourn our loss, rouse thy obscure compeers, and teach them thine own sorrow, say, with me died Adonais, till the future dares. Forget the past, his fate and fame shall be, an echo and light unto eternity. Again, this one's really long,
okay.
So I'm just going to stop.
Yeah. I never know if it's like, okay, are you stopping there? Is that the end of the poem?
I'm going to stop there. Okay. Again, it's super. So at this point, now they're still living in Italy. Percy starts his infatuation with Jane Williams.
Okay.
Now, Mary and Percy are living with the Williams, so it's Jane and Edward, and they're living together.
Okay.
And he seems to have had a little bit of a thing with Jane that he kept a secret from Mary.
Not great.
And there are poems in the multiple dedicated to her.
Okay, so more successful than
one
the previous.
Of which I will read. This is the one thing I had to go to the internet to look up, because as you can imagine, Mrs. Shelley did not have any notes about Jane Williams.
Yeah.
There was also, between Percy and Mary, some issues because she had recently lost a pregnancy. He was doing all this stuff behind her back with Jane. So there was some tension between them, and this was not a particularly happy point in their marriage.
That's really... After his wife had a miscarriage, and he goes and, fools around behind her back.
Yeah, well, that was because she was upset. So that's why he thought, oh, well, Mary's not her usual self. She doesn't want to talk about science. I'll have to find someone else.
Oh, what a jerk.
So he starts writing poems to Jane, and Jane becomes his muse. Now, whether or not their relationship was physical, we'll never know.
Yeah.
But it can safely be assumed that there was at least some kind of infatuation on Percy's end.
Yeah, the existence of love poems, yeah.
Yes. And wait till you hear this one.
Oh boy, alright.
To Jane, the keen stars were twinkling. The keen stars were twinkling, and the fair moon was rising among them. Dear Jane, the guitar was tinkling, but the notes were not sweet till you sung them again. As the moon's soft splendor o'er the faint cold starlight of heaven is thrown, so your voice most tender to the strings without soul had then given its own. The stars will awaken, though the moon sleep a full hour later tonight. No leaf will be shaken, whilst the dews of your melody scatter delight. Though the sound overpowers, sing again with your dear voice revealing a tone of some world far from ours, where music and moonlight and feeling are one. That is actually the end of that one.
What a sappy... It almost sounds like... That's so sappy, it almost sounds like a parody of an actual love poem. See, that one's not doing it for me. That's too much.
Apparently Jane played guitar, so that's why there's so many music references in here.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know, that one's not icky, that one's not bad vibes. I don't know, not my favorite of his. That one was really overblown.
Yeah, not a fan of Percy and Jane.
Mm-mm. Not my OTP.
Unfortunately, we've reached 1822.
Oh.
And 1822 is, the end of Percy's life. So, Percy Shelley and Edward Williams, who was Jane's husband, went out on their boat, and a storm blew up, and they drowned.
Both of them?
Yes. The thing is, and Mary wrote about this quite a bit, they had problems with that boat before. They knew it was not seaworthy and would not survive a storm.
And yet
they went out, and apparently they had gotten stuck somewhere in it, and it was a whole big deal. Percy and Edward Williams drown off the coast of Italy, and the boat and their bodies were found washed up later.
What if, honestly, I don't know anything about Mr. Williams. It's kind of a fitting end for Percy. It seemed kind of like his hubris, his lack of common sense, his lack of whatever. He took out an unseaworthy boat. Well, I guess it was seaworthy if it sailed, but, not as seaworthy as it should have been.
Yes. Their bodies were cremated on a beach in Italy, and this is where, supposedly, the heart that had calcified.
Yeah, that's
during
the myth.
The cremation, the myth.
Yeah.
Apparently there's a theory it also may have been his liver. Either way, Mary hung on to it.
Yes, an organ of some sort survived the cremation. It was calcified. And Mary Shelley, being the icon that she is...
And, as we've seen, utterly and hopelessly, completely in love with him.
Took it as memento mori.
So for our last poem is something that was being worked on at the time of his death. I thought it'd be fitting for our last entry in the life of Percy Bysshe Shelley. The Triumph of Life.
Boy, that's ironic.
Yes. But this was also composed in the spring and early summer of 22, a poem in which Shelley was engaged with at the time of his death.
That's really ironic.
So the irony just keeps adding on.
I think somebody wrote this man. I think a time traveler of our generation went back in time and created this man based on their own experience of our modern internet. In this essay, I will.
Especially because it's got such a narrative, tragic irony at the end of it.
Cut that out, I'm going to write that book.
This is the end of The Triumph of Life.
Okay.
And I'll start with the vampire bats.
Okay.
A flock of vampire bats before the glare of the tropic sun bringing ere evening. Strange night upon some Indian isle. Thus were phantoms diffused around, and some did fling shadows of shadows, yet unlike themselves. Behind them, some like eaglets on the wing. Were lost in the white day, others like elves, danced in 1,000 unimagined shapes, upon the sunny streams and grassy shelves, and others sate chattering like restless apes on vulgar hands. Some made a cradle of the ermined capes, of kingly mantles. Some across the tire of pontiffs sate like vultures. Others played, under the crown which girt with empire, a baby's or an idiot's brow, and made their nests in it. The old anemones sate hatching their bare broods under the shade of demon wings, and laughed from their dead eyes, to reassume the delegated power, arrayed in which these worms did monarchize. Who made this earth their charnel? Others more humble, like falcons, sate upon the fist of common men, and round their heads did soar, or like small gnats and flies, as thick as mist, on evening marshes thronged about the brow of lawyers, statesmen, priest, and theorist. And others, like discolored flakes of snow, on fairest bosoms and the sunniest hair, fell, and were melted by the youthful glow, which they extinguished, and, like tears, they were a veil to those from whose faint lids they rained in drops of sorrow. I became aware of whence those forms proceeded, which thus stained the track in which we moved. After brief space, from every form the beauty slowly waned, from every firmest limb and fairest face the strength and freshness fell like dust, and left the action and the shape without the grace of life. The marble brow of youth was cleft with care, and in those eyes where once hope shone, desire, like a lioness bereft of her last cub, glare ere it died, Each one of that great crowd sent forth incessantly these shadows, numerous as the dead leaves blown in autumn evening from a poplar tree. Each like himself and like each other were, at first, but some distorted seemed to be. Obscure clouds, molded by the casual air, and of this stuff the car's creative ray wrought all the busy phantoms that were there. As the sun shapes the clouds, thus on the way, mask after mask fell from the countenance and form of all, and long before the day was old, the joy which waked like heaven's glance, the sleepers in the oblivious valley died, and some grew weary of the ghastly dance, and fell, as I have fallen, by the wayside, those soonest from whose forms most shadows passed, and least of strength and beauty did abide. Then, what is life? I cried.
Dang. I see. That's just so, like, spooky that that's what he left off writing before he actually died.
Yeah.
It's like he wrote a poem about his own death.
Yeah.
Like his own sort of send-off to himself. That's so...
But there's no way he could have predicted what was going to happen that day.
No, and I mean, I think if he had predicted it, he would have finished the poem first.
Yes, and of note, he was only 29 years old when he died.
Wow, that's crazy. You know, sometimes life is just stranger than fiction. I did want to... Can you open it back up again?
Which one?
The last one. I just wanted to... This is another long one.
Yes, that's why I just read the end.
Yeah. Well, when you said unfinished, for some reason I thought, oh, maybe it's shorter. Oh my god. Yeah, it really is just one sentence.
That's probably where the refining would have come in had he lived to finish it.
Be a punctuation, yeah. I really liked the line about the worms. A raid in which these worms did monarchize.
Oh, yeah.
But I just like worms, so... Honestly, though, kind of a fitting end for Mr. Shelley. I don't think he would have wanted it any other way, except maybe 30 more years. And 30 more love affairs.
Probably, yeah. So that was the life of Percy Bysshe Shelley in his own words. In the words of his wife.
Yeah. Yeah, it was in his own words. Yeah.
In a way, and as interpreted by me through various research.
I like that format. I think it works.
Hopefully you also found this entertaining, informational.
Yeah, honestly, I might go back and read some of those poems in full for my own enjoyment.
For fun.
Yeah. Not all of them. I'm not going to read 120 pages. No offense, Mr. Shelley. You know what, though? I can kind of see how he got overshadowed by his wife. Because, nothing that we discussed here was any sort of revolutionary, shall I say, whereas Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was a really important novel in the history of English literature.
Yes.
So I can see how he got overshadowed, and honestly, he was a jerk. Well,
Mrs. Shelley did not talk about those things in her notes.
No, yeah, which I think also is telling in its own way.
And I think it's still very interesting to me that she included those poems.
Yeah. So she was, dedicated to the complete, having all of his work.
Yes,
but
I read that entire thing because I didn't want to have to go on the internet to find out who Jane was in relationship to them, but she did not mention the Jane poems in her notes.
But yeah, that's quite the interesting life. Well, rest in peace, Mr. Shelley. Hopefully you're not cheating on your wife in the afterlife, if there is an afterlife. I got nothing else to say.
Alright, well, let's wrap it up on that note.
Yeah, on that note, hopefully you enjoyed our Poetry Month specials. We had 2 very different episodes. I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, we keep kind of experimenting with the ways we come about things, and it keeps things interesting, I think.
Yeah, I know people like consistency, but I also think you have to keep it a little fresh to keep it exciting.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with dusty sort of old stories.
Yes, I hope that this has made Percy a not dusty.
He would fit right in on TikTok.
He would.
He would have an AO3 account, stay on Twitter. Yeah, well, let us know what you thought down below if you have any suggestions for formatting, or if you really like this one. We definitely can't apply it to everybody, but it is an interesting way to look at somebody's life, I think.
If there was any particular... Okay, if you were going to address your haters, your detractors, in a poem, would you?
Yeah. What form would you use? What poetic form would you use?
Maybe give us a couple lines.
Yeah. Haiku, sonic.
You could leave hate comments directed at us as long as they're in verse.
Yeah. That's
the rule. If you're
requirement.
going to leave a mean comment, it has to be in verse.
It doesn't have to rhyme, it doesn't have to have meter, although you get extra points if it does. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe, follow us on Instagram.
At Haunted Heart Society, with a period between those words.
Haunted.hearts.society.
Yes.
And we'll talk to you next time. Goodbye!
Bye!